Hey folks, and welcome back to the Sarcast. Today is a video response to Preach from Preach Gaming. Preach is a vlogger that I've been subscribed to for about a year now. He does loads of different World of Warcraft and gaming vids, and is usually very entertaining. But he recently put up a video regarding Mists of Pandaria and the ease of the expansion, and how the expansion should be made more like Burning Crusade in terms of difficulty level. Two things wrong with that. One, Mists of Pandaria is in beta at the moment, and raid tuning has only just started. I think it's a bit overly optimistic to expect the dungeons and the raids to be tuned at their final level this early on in their existence, because at the moment the raid tuning only started a week ago, and so far the raid schedule has been up on odd days, and it's only been single encounters so far. So I think it's a bit overly optimistic at this stage to expect the raids to be tuned to the level at which they will be when they're released, and QQing about their difficulty, or lack thereof, at this stage is a bit pointless. But let's take a look at some of the subs figures and World of Warcraft's subs history over the course of the previous several expansions. I'm going to ignore vanilla at the moment and just concentrate on Burning Crusade onwards, and we'll have a look and see how figures have risen and fallen since Burning Crusade. So this is the chart that Preach used in his video, and shows TBC launching and Wrath of the Lich King launching. However, what he failed to say was that this graph was horribly out of date. This was taken from a website called Digital Castration, which you will see linked in the annotation at the minute. That chart was made in a post in August 2010, which was 4 months prior to Cataclysm's launch. So if I just add in here what has happened since, you'll see Cataclysm launching right at the peak of World of Warcraft's subscriber numbers, and then dipping off horribly. Now this chart isn't very detailed, so what I'll do is I'll use the mmodata.net subs chart, which is a lot better. However, I'll cut out a lot of the guff here and concentrate on World of Warcraft and the previous 5 years. So as you can see there, TBC launched with about 8.25 million subscribers, and that was coming off the back of vanilla. Then a couple of years later, Wrath of the Lich King launched, and by this stage World of Warcraft had 11.5 million subscribers. And as you can see, it continued to grow there for the first few months, and then that initial rush of subscribers tailed off a bit and settled down to about 11.5 million, which is where Wrath launched, if not just slightly higher. And then more subscribers came back leading up to the launch of Cataclysm. However, as you can see there, since Cataclysm's launch, the subscriber numbers have plummeted, and Cataclysm was the expansion that Blizzard listened to the QQers whinging about how the game was too easy, how it was face roll, and how they wanted the game brought back to Burning Crusade sensibilities in terms of difficulty. It was, and look what happened to subscriber numbers. The subs just left in droves after the expansion's launch. The dungeons were just far too difficult for the majority of the player base, exacerbated by the fact that LFG, which was introduced in Wrath, pitted random players together. Putting random people together and expecting them to do something difficult is putting people on a hiding to nothing, really. Because look at LFR. LFR is a dumbed down version of Dragon Soul at the moment anyway, and will continue to be so for the future raid tiers. The majority of the player base just aren't good enough to do even LFR half the time. The number of times I've wiped on the simplest encounters, Ultraxion is the simplest encounter, bar Morchok, in the entire game. You have to DPS or heal or tank, and at random intervals click a button. Click one button and still the players fail. Now Preach was bemoaning the lack of player skill in the game, and that's fair enough, but when you look at the game as a whole, player skill is only involved in 2 parts of the game as a whole, either raiding or PvP. Beyond raiding and PvP, skill is not involved at all. Professions, auction house, dailies, questing, leveling, none of these require any skill on behalf of the player at all. It's only when you come to the challenging PvE content, as well as PvP, that player skill becomes a factor. More so when you get into heroic raiding. Now, I consider myself to be a heroic raider. I like playing the game at its hardest. I like challenging content. I like to put myself up against the hardest possible bosses in the game while they're still current content. However, I'm not as blind or as selfish to think that the entire game should be that way. Warcraft at the minute has just over 10 million subscribers left. Cataclysm lost, like I said earlier, 2 million plus subscribers from the player base. Now, are subscribers and players the same thing? No, patently not. Subscribers and active players are two different things, primarily because you will have players with more than one account, which I'm also considering doing myself, and you'll also have players getting themselves banned and restarting another account, effectively doubling the number of subs for that player for that month. So active players and subscribers are two separate beasts, and Blizzard use the active subscribers model to describe their game's popularity rather than active players, which is fair enough, because if I was Blizzard and I was owned by Activision, I would be shitting myself as well about dipping subscriber numbers, because recently Activision shut down yet another studio because of unimpressive sales figures. And this is a bit of a throwback to my previous video as well, regarding BioWare and EA. But when a company gets bought out by a parent company, that company is then expected to keep sales figures, subscriber numbers up and on the increase. However, Cataclysm didn't do that for Blizzard. It did the opposite, in fact. It's lost them, as I've said before, 2 million subscribers. That's a lot of subscribers to lose over the course of 18 months. That's a sixth of the player base lost because of one expansion. TBC may have been good at the time, but the design of TBC was very indicative of the time when the expansion was released. TBC was following straight off the back of Vanilla, and Vanilla took a lot of its design from the likes of EverQuest and Dark Age of Camelot and improved upon it in a lot of ways, but it was very grounded in that sort of era. Back then the game was all about grinding and slow leveling and making sure that the content was eked out over a longer time period. There wasn't much dynamism about the actual design of games back at the turn of the century. Most MMOs back then were very grindy. Questing wasn't much of a thing. It was all about grinding out your levels very, very hard. Warcraft improved upon that in a lot of ways. It introduced better questing, easier leveling, but even compared to today, Vanilla was very grindy. It was long. Grinding out levels took ages, and certainly now the game is a lot quicker to level up in and to get a character up to maximum level. However, game design has moved on within the past 5 years, and now there are more reasons why Blizzard should not be looking to do another expansion akin to Burning Crusade or early Cataclysm. Not least because it would drive away yet more subs, but there are other external reasons why they shouldn't be going down the Burning Crusade route again. Number one is competition. Now, as you can see here in this Venn diagram that I rather handily threw together, there are several different sources of competition for World of Warcraft. There's free-to-play games, there are subs-based games, other subs-based games, and then there are other games external to all that. Console games, single-player games, etc. So as you can see here, current sub-based games such as World of Warcraft, Secret World, and of course Star Wars, The Old Republic, and EVE, they are all subs-based games. Well, in the case of Secret World it will be shortly, but all these games launched with a subscriber model and have retained that subscriber model until now, at least anyway. Even though Star Wars The Old Republic is only about 7-8 months old, already the developers are talking about shifting it from the blue circle to the green circle and making the game free to play, because it got to a maximum of about 1.7 million subscribers and then lost 400,000 of those but after a more recent billing cycle. So Star Wars is now down to 1.3 million subscribers, hence why they're talking about making it free to play now. And of course you have the other free to play games as well, such as Lord of the Rings Online, Champions Online, Aeon, Runes of Magic, which is a complete World of Warcraft clone. You have smaller games like City of Heroes, DC Universe Online, and smaller still like Vindictus. Then of course you have all the single player games you can think of, like Gears of War, Halo, Modern Warfare, Call of Duty, all these sorts of games as well are competing for the WoW dollar. And then you have the outliers that fall into more than one category. Stuff like Dust 514 and Final Fantasy 11. So not only have you competition, generally though the MMO overall is in decline. If you look at the MMO data from 2009 onwards, most games subs figures are generally in decline anyway. As a result of this general decline, an increasing number of MMOs are now either launching as or converting to free to play. As you saw earlier on, games like Aeon, Lord of the Rings, Champions Online, City of Heroes, they were all previously subscription based games and have all now gone free to play. Now, free to play does not mean necessarily that the game is a failure or that the developers are making less money. Quite frequently, subs based games that got to a low number of subscribers that then converted to free to play have actually, in most cases, actually doubled or tripled their income as a result. So free to play does not necessarily mean failure. It just means it's a better model for that particular game. Another reason is, of course, that because there is more competition and there are other games with no barriers to entry, such as free-to-play games, players now are more fickle and they're more willing to leave game A and go to game B, leave game B, go to game C, and so on. So the player base these days is a lot harder to retain and there's less stickability about any particular title now. The next thing then is that convenience is king. Players want lower barriers to entry across the board, regardless of what the game is. They want access easier and things to be more convenient for them. Players see a game and they think, why should I have to go through all these hoops to access content, the cool stuff? Developers are now realising that they have to offer players the cool stuff earlier. I mean, with World of Warcraft, it isn't a recent thing. It's been ongoing since basically the start of Wrath. Your first mount used to be at level 40. It's now level 20. It's small stuff like that there that's made the game more convenient. Stuff like flying, etc. that was introduced in Burning Crusade. That was all brought in to make players' lives easier. LFG, LFR, all concessions to convenience. And if convenience is abundant in a game, players will find it easier to play the game and get more enjoyment out of it. Because who wants life to be made difficult on purpose? Next thing then is value for money. Especially with subscription-based games, if you're paying a set fee every month, be it £9, £14, whatever, you want to get your value for money. And players who are paying that sub fee, look at all these games out there now, and especially with an eye on the free-to-play games, they're looking at these games, they're charging a monthly subscription and go, why should I pay to get X, Y, and Z in that game when I can get it in this game for free? If players are looking to buy into a game and pay that set fee every month, they're looking at all the above points and thinking to themselves, am I getting value for money out of this game? Am I getting what I want? The next thing is that difficulty for a lot of players is not cool. It isn't what they're after, it isn't what they want. And a lot of the time, convenience for a lot of players equals easiness, which is wrong. It doesn't necessarily mean that. Convenience is one thing, easiness is another. You can be convenient and difficult at the same time, but most players now are looking to have basically as much access to the content as they possibly can. And Blizzard see this and realise that difficulty isn't cool. It's lost them subscribers over the past 18 months as a result. And as a result, they U-turned mid-expansion. With the launch of 4.3, they tuned the difficulty down of both Tier 13, which was horrifically under-tuned, and introduced LFR early. It was meant to be a feature coming in Mists of Pandaria, but in an effort to retain subscribers through to the end of Cataclysm and into Mists of Pandaria, they brought this feature forward. And it's a mixed bag, really. It's been successful in some ways and complete screw up in others. And then of course there's content consumption, which is something Blizzard are very keen to expand upon. They spend a lot of time pumping resources into creating raid content, creating raid gear, PvP gear, raid bosses, working out raid mechanics, tuning raids, tuning classes because of raids and PvP. and there is a small percentage of the player base actually gets to experience that. That is the main reason why the likes of LFR and the LFG were introduced, because they're pumping maybe 50% or more of their resources into creating raid content, PvP content, and only 3% of the player base were experiencing that, and that's horribly skewed. If only 3% or less of the player base is experiencing 50% of your work, something has to be done, and done it was. Will Blizzard ever go back to an expansion like Burning Crusade or Early Cataclysm? No, I don't think they will, and I don't think they should either. Heroic raiding is there for the players that want the challenge. Normal mode raiding is for people that find LFR too easy. LFR is there for the players that just don't give a shit or can't cope with normal mechanics. So the game as it is at the moment, whilst Heroic could be a bit harder, so could normal really. Normal modes in tier 13 was very, like I said, very undertuned for the first half to 3/4. But I don't think it should be brought back to the level of TBC or Early Cataclysm again. Also, the reason why bosses back in TBC weren't killed for weeks after the expansion's launch, back then you had 10 levels to get between 60 and 70, and in between 60 and 70 it was a fairly longish grind. It wasn't anywhere near as quick as going from 70 to 80 was in Wrath. Plus back then you had raid achievements, heroic achievements. A lot of the content was gated off artificially, and that was something Blizzard stepped away from in Wrath, and certainly something that they're not looking to go back and do again. So yes, you can go from leveling up to maximum level, getting a few bits of gear here and there, and then jumping straight into the entry level raids, and that's fine. Preach also bemoaned the lack of lore figures in the new expansion, and said that they may as well be killing cubes for all he cares about the new raid bosses. Well, guess what, Preach? For the past 8 years we have jauntily frolicked round Azeroth, murdering all the major lore figures in the game. There are no real major lore figures left in the game to combat. Sure, there's the likes of Ashara and Inzoth, but beyond those two, there are no major lore figures actually left in the game to actually take on as a major villain. No, there isn't any poster boy for this expansion, but that's deliberate. Blizzard wanted to get back to a sense of mystery and exploration with this expansion. And no, there is no poster boy. That's agreed. And like I said, it is deliberate on Blizzard's part. They want us going into this expansion not knowing where we're heading to. Much like we don't know where we're going with Pandaria because it's all new content, all new lore. It would be pretty shit if we knew at this point who the final boss of the expansion is going to be, because we don't know, and neither should we know who it is. It may turn out to be Garrosh, who knows. It's an entirely new, undiscovered continent, full of new races, new lore, new protagonists, new antagonists, and it would ruin the surprise and the mystery if we were to know now who the final boss of the expansion is. So that's why the expansion should not have a poster boy, because if you put a poster boy on the front of the cover right now, you're going to ruin the surprise. And I get the feeling with this expansion Blizzard is building up to a fairly big surprise at the end of the expansion. I have an idea where they might be going, but I'll keep that for another video. And if it does come to pass, then it makes things very interesting for the expansion after Mists. So in summary, Blizzard tried the return to TBC sensibilities experiment with the beginning of Cataclysm. It didn't work. Not for the majority of players. Yes, some of the ones that QQ'd about the difficulty level stayed around afterwards and throughout it, but a lot of the content was gated off to them as a result of that spike in difficulty. Blizzard should never ever, in my opinion, try to do Burning Crusade over again in terms of difficulty level, because they want their content to be seen by more than 3% of the player base. They want their hard work to be experienced, seen and looked at and enjoyed. Why blame them for wanting that to happen? Yes, it might make the heroic raiders feel more special because they're the only ones seeing this content, but that's just elitism, and elitism really died out round about 2008. Sure, some of the concessions they've made have made the game worse. LFG, LFR, aside from the convenience factor, hasn't really improved the game. If anything, it's actually made the community worse and exemplifies Penny Arcade's greater internet fuckwad theory, in that if you give somebody, a nice normal guy, anonymity and an audience, he'll turn into a retard. But moaning about difficulty levels at this point in the life cycle of Mist's raid content is a bit pointless, really. It's just far too early to make a call on how hard or easy the raid bosses in the game actually will be, because Blizzard could turn around at any point and change the difficulty level, introduce new mechanics, remove mechanics, tweak difficulty levels. It's open season really at the moment on the beta servers, and we don't even have 5.01 up yet on the PTR, so it's just far too early to be making a call like that. And like I said, lore isn't really a consideration here because there is no lore left to turn to. All the major lore figures that we would combat have been combated and defeated. All bar one, which is, I think, what we're actually building up towards. And you know who I'm talking about, but we'll get there next video.